Hello and welcome to Practical Inclusion, or what we're calling today is International Women's Day Rerun. So I'll explain that in a little while, but firstly I want to acknowledge the Wadawurrung people on whose lands that I have the absolute privilege of living, working and playing on, and currently advocating for people to vote yes in the referendum that will occur sometime this year. I've spoken about it before. I will be voting yes. I'm trying to engage with people in conversations about it, to bust myths, and to provide the information I can about it, to make sure that more people have an informed position as they go into the referendum. And I think the time to start that advocacy and those chats are absolutely now. I call out to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are watching in today, and particularly Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who have a disability, because we are talking about disability today, and we are absolutely also always conscious of intersectionality and how compounding, how identity, multiple facets of identity impact and compound in a way to create exclusion for people, not only in our workplaces, but in society more broadly as well. I joke that this is International Women's Day rerun because I was scrolling LinkedIn on the week of International Women's Day, and I saw a post by Zoe calling out the fact that women with disability were pretty much absent from so many of the events that were held across that time. And I absolutely noticed that, and felt like we need to create more space. We shouldn't have to, but really let's have meaningful conversations. And let's also talk about why women with disability are still being kind of left at the bottom of the pile, to wait until whatever it is, the International Day of Visibility, I think, for disability, which is in December sometime. It's like that's the only time somebody with disability is allowed to talk about their experiences, and we need to actively challenge and change that. So I saw that post. I said, Zoe, will you come on and chat on LinkedIn Live? And I'm so grateful that she said that she would give us some of her time. And when I looked her up, I went, wow, what a star. And that's clear by the amount of you who have registered for this session today. So if you are watching live, please give us your comments, questions, reflections, feedback. Also, if you're watching on the replay, do the same thing, and we will engage with the comments and the questions that you place. But that's enough from me. I want to hand us over to Zoe. Zoe, I'd love you to start us off by telling us a little bit about yourself, what you do, the advocacy work that you do, but also anything that you want to share about your personal story with us as well.
Sure. Always a little nerve-wracking with a tell us about yourself question.
Yeah, it's very broad. I get it.
Well, my name is Zoe, and I am a journalist, copywriter, editor, disability advocate, author, and speaker. A lot of things in that. I like to do a lot. Probably the autistic side, just getting into my special interests and being like, yes, we will do all the things. But I love the work I do. I love that I can use my lived experience of disability to make an impact and raise awareness about these things that society, for the most part, doesn't talk about. The disability community does often, but we usually don't have that platform. Or if we do, it's more of a token gesture rather than actual inclusion and intersectional inclusion with all the different things that can come from disability and all the intersecting identities that don't really get heard. So I'm really grateful that this is my work. I started writing. I've been writing my entire life, but I was first published at 16 with my local newspaper. And from there, I just fell in love with journalism and storytelling and the power of words. And I just believed it could change the world and wanted to be a part of that. Now, as someone in my approaching late 20s and multiple disabilities that I know of, including autism, I only got diagnosed last year, which was wild, and it makes a lot of sense. And also my mental health. I live with bipolar and anxiety, and also fibromyalgia and likely adenomyosis, probably other things, but doctors don't really listen. So I'm just doing the best I can with what I've got. But I just do what I can to make the world a better place. That's all I want to do, and to know that someone has breathed easier because I exist. So yeah, it's wild that people actually follow me and like me. So thank you so much for having me on here, and thank you anyone watching. I appreciate it. I get very bad imposter syndrome, which I think everyone does, but it means a lot.
We've just had a comment from Maria too. I've followed Zoe on LinkedIn for about a year, always value her posts and perspectives on issues relating to disability. So people are absolutely on board with the conversation. And we would love to hear from you. What are some of the key, I guess, what are the messages that you wanted people to hear on International Women's Day we didn't hear?
Oh gosh, so many. Like I did see some disabled advocates speaking, but mostly I just heard so many people in the same boat being disappointed because like I was posting for months and like even last year about International Women's Day and will anyone trying to get an opportunity because I've never spoken on International Women's Day before. I would really like to, and I've started speaking. I've been speaking for a couple of years now at just smaller events, but I really want to grow that. So I was quite shocked when there wasn't really any opportunity, and most events weren't even accessible. Like, you go to an event and you have to spend the whole day there, and it's probably not wheelchair accessible. If it is, you're expected to be able to have the energy capacity to listen to a conversation the whole day and interact the whole day. And they're so expensive, and it's already really expensive being disabled. So I just saw a blatant lack of inclusion, and there's just I'm going to forget things that I want to say, but I guess just that we exist, disabled people exist, and representation has been pretty poor, in the world mostly. It's not great. Most disabled representation is usually written by non-disabled people. It is getting better, thankfully, thanks to people talking about it and advocates and actors and writers that are pushing that we need lived experience perspectives, like nothing about us without us. But it still is really bad. And like if it's usually either tragedy or using disability as so I can't think of the word. Bit of brain fog. But it just really frustrated me that we weren't hearing the issues that face disabled people, that the accessibility issues, I don't know if it's just me, might be. I'll just talk until Brie comes back. But yeah, I just saw so many things that weren't being raised and weren't being talked about, and it really sucks. It really sucks that we don't get heard. It really sucks that I consider myself to be relatively privileged as a disabled person because I do have a growing platform, because I can sometimes verbally speak and communicate, because I'm not really afraid of other people's opinions anymore. But so many people don't have that. So many people don't have those privileges, and they are being left out. Disability inclusion can't just be, white people. And I am white, and I recognize that. But, if we can't even do the absolute bare minimum, we're missing out on so much, and that's just not good enough. Don't know where Brie has gone. I think it might be just me. Don't know if this is still working. Hi, if anyone's watching. I don't really know what to do. Oh, God. Ah! Hi, you're back.
We said this would happen, didn't we? I said I was having some internet troubles. So sorry to everybody. You've probably just had Zoe and not me.
Yeah, I was like, oh no, Brie's gone. It says it's still live. I'll just keep going. And I was very awkward. I think I cracked jokes.
I'm glad you kept going. Sorry. Did you need to finish?
I can't remember what I was talking about.
So when I jumped out, you were talking about the accessibility issues that just inherently existed in a lot of the events anyway.
Yeah, and that wasn't even recognized. And I see this in a lot of events. Like, for example, I was once invited to speak about accessibility at a venue in front of some politicians. And I couldn't get there because the venue wasn't accessible and they weren't willing to do like online, for example. And like, I couldn't get there. Like, it's just, or like I got invited to speak at a human rights conference at a university, and they didn't want to like pay me for my time, just like the bare minimum, like not at all reflective of how much energy and effort it takes to actually write a 20-minute speech, practice the 20-minute speech, and all the other things. It's just ridiculous. People just expect disabled people to give out their expertise for free, and that we should be grateful because at least there's some representation. And I really reject that. I hate that. No, pay people, pay all people, but especially pay disabled people, because we have way less energy and way more medical admin and medical bills. And, that's expensive. Like, we need to get paid or we don't live, unfortunately. I mean, everyone, but, especially if you have energy impairments where you can't work as much or do as much, it's rough. And this is never recognized in the business space pretty much, except for, I guess, me and a couple of other people screaming into the void.
This is such a great point. And I know when I wrote a post about this a while ago, it hit such a chord, the way we demand emotional labor from people because of their identities, but refuse to pay them. And I see this in workplaces when people are quite happy to pay me as a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant to build their plan. But when I suggest that they actually need some disability consultants to come in for those specific pieces of work, their response is, well, we might just set up an advisory group.
And will they pay those advisory groups? Because most of them do not.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, such a good point. And I love the way you've articulated that in terms of the extra labor, essentially, for a person with disability. What were some of the other messages that you would have liked to have seen get across more through International Women's Day?
I mean, one thing I'm particularly passionate about is medical gaslighting and medical misogyny. And I think this is for anyone that has a uterus, whether you're a cis woman or, a trans person or non-binary person. I think as you add more of those layers on, it gets more difficult because you've got all the other things that also come into it. But as well as, your skin color also determines that it's, people are more likely to be ignored the further marginalized you are, which is ridiculous. But even being, one of the most privileged groups, as in like I recognize my white privilege here. I was trying to think of the right word. It was like not coming. But we don't get listened to in the medical system. We get ignored. We get gaslit. We get told it's all in our head. And conditions that primarily affect people with uteruses are often the ones that are most under-researched and less known about. Like, for example, fibromyalgia, which I have. It mostly affects people with uteruses. Same with conditions like MECFS. And those two conditions are so stigmatized in the medical community. It's just ridiculous. Like, I was researching, I'm running an article, and apparently it was I do have to double check this. But from what I read, firstly, the reason, ME, which is a energy impairment condition that's similar to fibro, but I think less painful. But I do think I also have that condition. But because it primarily affects women, two male psychologists in the 70s were like, oh, it's just mass hysteria and it's psychological. And like, no, there is actually research that these conditions exist. There's tests for these conditions. Like, we often hear like, oh, we don't know much about them, but actually researchers do. They exist. Other countries are embracing these guidelines, but Australia is woefully behind, still recommending harmful things that are hurting people. Not to mention how people with like conditions like endometriosis or adenomyosis are treated. It takes, I think, an average of like 10 years to get a diagnosis, which is ridiculous. I've been fighting for 5 and still can't get one. So it's just ridiculous. And we can't make choices about our own bodies. I can't choose to just have my ovaries removed if I want to. I have to get a permission, or like, what if my future husband wants babies? Oh, but like, we don't have control of our own bodies. And I think that's a huge issue, not just for disabled people, but for everyone. I think it becomes amplified when you're disabled because treatment is very important when you're disabled and in pain and tired and you lose your ability to function. And I don't think non-disabled people really get how bad it can get, like being utterly bedbound and not able to move. Or some days just walking to my lounge room is hell. It feels like I run a marathon, and that obviously isn't a marathon, but it feels like that's my body. And, you know, it makes things like cooking and cleaning and working and all the medical stuff and life admin, it's just impossible. So it makes an already difficult life more difficult. So that is something I'm quite passionate about, as well as general accessibility and genuine inclusion, not just token inclusion. Probably so much more that I'm not remembering, but, you know, just to include us and not be token about it, not just being like, oh, we've got one disabled person, that's fine, look how great we are. Like, no, you cannot possibly capture the whole disabled experience with one person. You need many, many, many people of many different identities, and we don't get that. And in all these areas that, you know, even claim to promote diversity inclusion, still won't make things flexible and accessible so we can actually attend in the media, in the business space, trying to get a job, even just trying to find a job where you can work from home, for example. I've had friends that have been trying for so long and they can't get it. And like, we showed we can do it in COVID when it benefited everybody, but now it just benefits the disabled community. People suddenly don't care.
I was going to ask you about that, because in the lead up to this conversation, I've had a few people in my inbox sharing their experience of being disabled and not being able to get job opportunities. What are you seeing are the biggest barriers? What do organisations need to be doing to break down those barriers?
Many things we can be doing. I actually wrote an article recently on this, so I can't remember the statistics, but you know, we just don't, like, I see all the time on job advertising, like, oh, we value diversity and inclusion and we're an equal opportunities employer, but as soon as you ask for an adjustment, nope. Like, for example, I know in the media, particularly for me, trying to find, say, part-time work or casual work has not been something I can do. Like, I've had phone calls with people about a full-time position. They're like, oh yeah, so excited, this sounds great, you sound perfect. I'm like, oh, but I can't work full-time. I'm like, oh, well, sorry, we're not interested then. And like, I know some places do have this, but it's not as common as it needs to be. Not at all. So firstly, we need to have flexible working. We need to allow people to work part-time or work one day, or, you know, split the times you work. So maybe you can't work a whole 8-hour day. I certainly can't. But I might be able to work, you know, like 2-hour spaces across a couple of days, if I'm lucky. But, you know, accessibility and flexibility benefits everyone. It would benefit parents. It would benefit people with caring responsibilities. It benefits people who are rural. And it also benefits disabled people, because the norm doesn't work for everyone. And we just keep insisting that it does, but it doesn't. And, you know, I know not all jobs can be work from home, but if they can be, you should be. And it shouldn't be like, oh, you can have one day at home. Like, no, like you might be able to occasionally visit the office, but it shouldn't be the expectation that you can physically come in, because energy impairments, like in my last job, just getting to the office killed me. And then having to sit upright in an office and not being able to have my medication, having to walk a lot further to go to the kitchen or the bathroom and not having anywhere to do my stretches. And I was in agony and it was awful. Not to mention, like, many in-person places are not accessible. So if you need mobility aids or you can't use stairs or walk very far, it's a battleground. But because you don't look disabled, you're expected just to keep going. So those are two main things, but I guess
There's
also just oh, sorry.
No, there's just so much in there that I want to unpack, because, you know, absolutely this rigid application of this hybrid working model is ludicrous in my mind and works absolutely against flexible working principles. And the other thing you've highlighted there is that how many organizations are absolutely saying that they're a flexible workplace and they have great flexible working policies, but none of their jobs get advertised as part-time. They're all advertised as full-time. When you get into the organization, you see that there's some room to move a full-time job down to part-time. So why aren't they advertising it as that at the beginning, as you say, to facilitate the employment of people who have amazing skills but perhaps can't work in that structure?
It's just ridiculous. And, workplaces often don't feel safe because we are a society that is still so stigmatized towards disabilities. I think especially if they're invisible because they're really misunderstood. People tend to think, oh, just push through, or, if you see someone, they have makeup on, they brush their hair or something, and they're walking and smiling, oh, they must feel good. No, 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 no. Like, no matter how much I'm smiling or being chirpy, I assure you I'm still in pain, and I assure you I'm still tired, and you cannot tell someone how someone's feeling from how they look. It's, a really basic thing, but so many people don't get that, and they just think, rah, 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 rah. But, you don't see us when we're at our worst. And if we're out in the public or, interacting with people, that is us being our absolute best. And then we burn out when we go home, and are alone and can rest. And, I think also like autistic people, that is something that isn't represented at all. It's like historically been seen as a bad thing. I personally think it's a wonderful thing. I mean, a bit difficult with the barriers of just society and the expectations to communicate and behave and be how a neurotypical should, which is ridiculous because we're all different. But I don't think workplaces have a genuine feeling of psychological safety when it comes to disclosing disabilities, and to feel like they'll be able to ask for their access needs. So they'll be able to ask for flexibility. That just doesn't really happen for the most part. I've been very lucky with some disabled organizations, which are great, but, there are so many barriers, and it's a scary thing to ask for your access needs, especially if you're battling with imposter syndrome, which I think everyone does. But, you feel like an imposter in terms of your career. You feel like an imposter in terms of your identity as well, too, sometimes. Like, to get that, to feel like you can use the label of disabled is a big thing, especially when lots of people are like, oh, don't call yourself that. That's a bad thing. It's just a word. It's just a word. It's not a bad thing. Differences are great and important and needed.
Yeah, wow. My internet was a bit fuzzy then, but I think people will still be able to hear you fine. I think it's on my end. There's just a few. I missed a question that was earlier when I got kicked out, came back, the question wasn't there anymore. So we'll have to go back to that and write a response to it. But there was a question here from Maria. Are there any guidelines or protocols around how to remunerate lived experience contributors? I'm working on some research and I've had difficulty finding guidance on this. Zoe, have you come across any?
No. I mean, there's anything freelancing, I think, is pretty much you just dictate your own rate, which is very difficult. I know, like, in terms of copywriting, there's lots of discussions around rates, but I don't know of any guidelines. Maybe there are, but if not, they're not super well known. That doesn't, I mean, they may exist, I just am not aware of it. But yeah, especially when a lot of people might be like, oh, set your rate, and they'll be like, oh, $10. Like, no. You have value. Do not charge little.
And I think that responsibility is on organisations, right, to recognise what is a fair fee to be paying people for the work that they're asking them to do. And I'm also, Maria, I'm sorry, I haven't seen any guidelines or protocols either. I've certainly worked with organisations that that have their own policies around it. And yeah, I'm a bit like Zoe. I will absolutely ask people for their rate. In some cases, I'm restricted and have to say, this is what we're offering for this particular piece of work. And giving people agency to say yes or no on that. But mostly it's what is your rate? If there's advisory groups, what I commonly see is this practice of, we'll give gift cards. Some people want gift cards. For some people that works for them. For others, that's really offensive. So think about asking people, how would you like to receive remuneration for this activity? I think and that's something that Christina Ryan educated me on a couple of years ago, because I was doing that too. So yeah, trying to give people flexibility in the way that they want to receive the remuneration for the lived experience. But it also, I find it really challenging when people do offer to do things for free. in their space, and the impact that then that has on others who actually, as you say, Zoe, need that money to be able to cover the effort and the emotional labor that they put into those activities. So it's a really a tricky space.
Yeah, I refuse to do unpaid work anymore. I just can't do it and live. And I really encourage any other disabled person to not work for free anymore. I mean, any person really, but if it's for a good cause and you have the capacity to, that's awesome. Like, kudos. Thank you for doing the energy stuff when we can't. But if you're disabled or have any kind of energy impairment, don't work for free. Please don't work for free. Even if you don't have heaps of experience, your time is still valuable. And you might say you don't have an experience, but lived experience, like, you got a whole lifetime of it.
Yeah, exactly. And I always like to bring that comparison to, well, if you're getting an accountant in to give you some advice on your accounting practices, I'm pretty sure they're charging. And I think we need to place it in that context. If we're asking people to support a business and create commercial outcomes for that business as well as the people outcomes, then we should absolutely be remunerating.
Yes.
Now, Zoe, I'm very conscious of our time. I know we started a little bit late and I've kind of dropped down and stuff, but is there anything else that you wanted to share with the audience? I think we've covered the International Women's Day stuff. I think that's a really big message for everybody when you're involved in running events. And it's not just International Women's Day. We've got Ida Hobbit coming up. There are absolutely queer people with disabilities, right? And they should be represented in the panels that you're putting together. At all of these events, the disability is not a separate standalone topic, right? It's got to be included in all our conversations.
Yeah, and like, it's more than just International Women's Day too, or International Day of People with Disability, which is in December, and that's usually the main one. Disabled people get asked to do things, and for free, I might add, which that's just an insult, to be perfectly honest, as far as I'm aware. But there are also so many other things that we don't get considered for, like, for example, Mental Health Month, World Suicide Prevention Day. Mental illness is a disability, and especially, I was reading a statistic. I think it was something like 300 and something percent. I think it was 363, but I'll just say 300 just because I can't remember the exact number. But you have a 300% increased chance of taking your life if you live with a chronic health condition. I'm like, yep, I feel that. Sorry, I probably should have put a trigger warning in at that. But, autistic people are 9 times more likely to take their lives. And we don't talk about that. And these things happen because we don't talk about disability. We don't talk about autism. We don't include and make people feel safe and welcome and have their access needs. Like, hey, you can STEM. Hey, you can communicate in a non-speaking way, and that's fine. That's not any less. Or like, hey, this is actually wheelchair accessible, and actually being wheelchair accessible, because most places that say they're accessible are not. Gosh, I've got much content to post about that. But there's also like Disability Pride Month coming up in July, and no one celebrates that except for the disabled community. Like, Pride Month for like LGBTQI plus usually is celebrated in June, and like, you'll see companies have rainbows and talk about how inclusive they are when they probably aren't. But no one even mentions Disability Pride Month. No one even knows about it. But it shouldn't just be disabled days that we're involved in. It should be everything, because we have value in the leadership space and the business space and the advocacy space. It needs to happen, and it can't just be one person and think like, oh, that's enough. There's my one token disabled person. Like, no, include us, pay us, listen to us, and be good allies, and share our content, follow us online, and raise these conversations with other people, because we speak out about it to change things and make a difference, but we can't do that alone, and we're also very tired, so allyship is very needed. I think you're a little frozen.
Gosh, we're going to end this before. Oh, I'm back.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, we're going to end here. Absolutely follow Zoe and engage and interact and share her content, but also go back into your organizations and really look at the work that's being done around disability, because I promise you, from the work I'm seeing, it literally is sitting at the bottom of the pile. If you're a public service organization in Victoria, and you're doing gender equality action plans and gender impact assessments, it has to also centre women with disability. And I'm certainly not seeing that in the way that needs to occur. Disability in leadership, you brought that up, Zoe. We could talk about that for a whole nother half-hour session, I think. Thank you so much for coming on. Thanks, everybody, for listening in and dealing with our technical issues. And we'll be back again next month with another guest and another topic. So send them through. If you yourself are sitting there and you've heard Zoe talk about imposter syndrome, you have got something important to say, come and take this opportunity. I want to share this platform with whoever needs it to come and talk about the experiences that you have and the professional expertise you have also around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Thanks, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks again, Zoe.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.